Alrighty, live right now. Just gonna hang a few minutes while people show up, if they show up. Doesn't matter. I'm running a bit of a shorter stream today, so it's not really all that important. So while I wait for people to show up, first I want to say thank you for being here. Um, as you know, my name is Jamie Cohen, and I am a professor of Media Studies and Internet Culture at Queens College. And this is my live office hours that I do weekly, but I will not be doing them next week or the week after. Next week is graduation. So obviously, I mean, I guess I could stream from graduation. That could be kind of funny, but I won't. Um, and the following week, I'll be in Rome. The following Thursday, I'll be giving the second of 3 talks in 1 week in Rome. So I'm going to be doing one talk to my former class that I used to teach in Rome. I used to teach a course on media archaeology and journalism, or media archaeology and media production in Rome in June's, and I can no longer do that, obviously, for really obvious reasons. For anybody who knows me, it's impossible to go away for an entire month with babies and children. So that's not possible. So now, what I'm really fortunate. Oh, sorry, I'm loading film. What I'm really fortunate is that on that Wednesday when I'm in Rome, I'm going to be speaking to the class that I used to teach, which is going to be kind of cool because it's like I haven't taught in Rome officially since 2022. That was my first Gen Z class post quarantine period, and I just haven't had the chance. I was there in 2022 to onboard a new professor, and she's phenomenal. And so basically, I'm just going back to go give my intro lecture, which is a lecture about time. And I'll talk with you a little bit about that time lecture today, because it's a lecture I similarly gave in my grad class. So this is one of those very cheap Ektar 25, Ektar 35 cameras. It's like a film camera, but it's like a vertical. So it's it basically is you get, instead of 36 exposures, you get like 70, ish, which is kind of cool, so you get like 70 out of it. Of course, it is filmed on the frame, so the person who develops the photo doesn't usually scan 70. They'll scan 2 at once because there's 2 verticals in it. So it basically uses double the frame size on each of the grommets, which is kind of a cool little device. So that's kind of neat. And I'm bringing it camping this weekend because I need to go camping or I'm going to absolutely lose my mind. Okay. So, anyway, if you have any questions, let me just add a note in here. If you have any questions or want to talk about something, add it to the chat. And I misspelled chat. So let's talk today. So the first thing is, before I get into any of the deeper stuff today, I do want to talk a bit about the end of the semester and how things wrapped up, because it was a pretty interesting semester. Now, my first note about this semester, this is spring 2026, which is great. Now, it's time is something I'm fascinated with. I'm kind of obsessed with time. So like knowing that I'm teaching in this semester is my second semester as a tenured faculty member, which means that this is where I work for the rest of my life. So it's kind of like I better like it. This was the first semester since the quarantine period where my students were like opened up again. And what I mean is like they're talking, they're more expressive than they used to be. In the semesters just after the quarantine period, when we came back to back into school, probably there's a lot of glare on there. Probably a bit too soon, and I mean literally probably a year too soon. But we were sent back because Joe Biden believed that we need to go back to work. A lot of people in my field also believe that it was a lot of parents, especially maybe men, who just were really tired of the work at home experience or having their children around. And so we switched it back to going to work, even though the pandemic was not over, nor is it currently over. I don't know what strain we're on. But anyway, the biggest thing about the whole pandemic period or the whole quarantine period was that there was no real way of dealing with the trauma that came with that. Like, what I mean is, like, there was no, I mean, we've talked about this. I've talked about this on Network Issue with Destiny, but I've also talked about it with like students. We All people all simultaneously were thrust onto the internet, like, all at once, nearly globally, except for the first responders. Now, I put that in air quotes because these are people that basically sacrificed their health for services that we could have kind of done without, but they did the work. But anyway, and this doesn't include, obviously, law enforcement or health issue or any of those people. I'm talking about, like, DoorDash drivers. So most people were thrust onto the internet without any digital literacies whatsoever. Everybody simultaneously became internet creators because we were using Zoom to go to class, or we were creating content that helped educate each other, or we were using digital tools, but no one had a rule book. And it's kind of funny to me that all the way back when, like early 2010s, I used to go to conferences, communications conferences, and people would always bring up, the internet never came with a manual. And it's like, well, of course it didn't, because it's too dispersed. It's too huge of an object. It's a hyper object. So giving it a manual wouldn't make any sense, because the manuals and typically always privilege the people that have the most amount of access to that type of information. So of course it doesn't have a manual because it's a communication device. That's similar to the way that, like, cell phones or the phone never came with a manual. You pick it up, you call somebody. We assume human communication exists. Anyway, in the semesters after the pandemic, students were fairly, like, cloistered. I don't want to explain it. They weren't expressive. It was very much like you could tell there was this latent trauma from the whole entire event. A lot of students missed their proms, they missed their high school graduations, they missed a lot of things that the typical high school student would get, or the typical college student would get. And so in those semesters, there wasn't much talking. There's a lot of, like, distant and non eye contact, and a lot of just a lot of, you could tell. Anyway, this semester was the first semester that I've had since that I could really genuinely say I'm really, really happy to be an educator. Like, this is the first semester where I really feel like people are starting to speak again, the expressions are coming out, and people's opinions are very much more clear, is the best way to describe it. This semester was so interesting to me because this is the first semester since I was hired at Queens College where I didn't teach any of the mandatory courses. I was teaching 3 different electives. Our major, I was hired into the advertising line, and our major does not have any, it doesn't have many electives. And so I was, basically, I pitched some. I created a couple. And so the couple I created 2 of them. I love creating courses. It's like, it's, for those of you who know me, my previous job at Malloy, not only did I create courses, but I created a major. So I'm very, like, I know how to write courses. I know how to write curriculum. I know how to get curriculum approved by the state. And so I wanted things that I needed to add to the advertising major were things that, like, were knowledge gaps. And there was really 2 big knowledge gaps. One was trust and safety, which is how on platform, like, we have a social media course. Josh Chapdelaine teaches that. It's incredible. Students love it. And then we don't have, like, a dedicated trust and safety. There's always a lecture on trust and safety, but it's not really, like, a big thing on that. So what I did is reframed it around brand safety. The other, which I'll get back to in a second. The other one was called From Texaco Star Theater to Influencer SponCon, a history of commercial television advertising. And so it was basically like a television studies course. And I hadn't taught television studies in years, probably since Malloy or maybe even Hofstra, so it's like, I love teaching television studies. I was a television major. I'm fascinated by it. My master's was about television studies and YouTube studies and so forth. So I taught that. And then in grad school, I taught a course called Tactical Media. And Tactical Media was awesome. It was my first time ever teaching it. It was an evolution of the digital activism course we had at Queens. And in this case, the question was about, like, how do you make media that is tactical? Like, how do you make it so it does something? It motivates something. And then I took it very seriously, like tactical, like digital as in, like, your fingers or digits, and tactility, like the ability to touch something. And so we did a lot of work with analog products, a lot of analog photography, a lot of zine making, and then finally a lot of conceptual projects. And so I just want to, I'll point out one of them first. So I'll start from the back. I'll start from Tactical Media and work to the other ones. Tactical Media started with a framing device about what is the most tactical of media now. And arguably, the thing that framed our entire semester, the arguable big one, was the manosphere. It's kind of like the most tactical type of media that exists today, because not only does it act like an MLM and a recruitment tool, but it actually motivates. It actually does the thing. It makes people watch the content. The content is monetized. It encourages other people to participate. It makes men feel like they belong to something bigger than themselves. It's a great model. However, it's filled with hate for women. So it's actually a very good model for a very, well, extremely bad product. And so it's like we have to understand that like the models do exist, but they're typically based within these spaces of like hatred. And so that's something we want to work against and like create conceptual path of educating people. So I framed the whole course around that, there is a model of tactical media that exists and what we can do about it. And the second thing was about capture. Sometimes media isn't the most important thing to produce, but rather capturing things. And so the course started just after the murders of Alex Preddy, um, uh, and Renee Good, and we were talking about how important it was to capture it and how important cell phone capture was. So the tactical media in that case wasn't even the media, but the fact the phone itself could be a recording device for social good. So in that tension between capture and creation, so capture, good. The tactical media that exists, manosphere, bad. So in between there is this whole space of experimentation that we can kind of work with because they exist on both ends. The projects exist on both ends. We also explored like what it was like to update the idea of tactical media, like moving away from like the prank calling or like moving away from like the stunt work, which is just like basically reshaped into rage bait today. And so we kind of like worked our way into like discussing like how do you do things like covert pedagogy, which is like a big part of my pedagogy. Covert pedagogy is when you're teaching somebody through a metaphor, rather than teaching somebody directly of any specific thing or using terms that might be scary, like the term misogyny or feminism, which are words that you know, but they end up becoming big words in people's minds. And so what you do is basically wrap it under a metaphor. And the metaphors are really good. So when you wrap it into a metaphor, it actually becomes a good way of storytelling. This is a very much the foundation of like what Digital Void was based on. Like Digital Void was based on the idea of like talking to the public, making information entertaining, and having people walk away with new knowledge that wasn't directly lectured to them. It was something that was wrapped in something much more weird. So like one time I talked about how private equity is eating up local businesses through toddler zones. Basically, like when you have a toddler, you bring them to like these play parks, but I referred to them as Blippy bait because basically they would build these structures. They would hope Blippy would show up. If you don't know who Blippy is, it's a talk for another time. And when he does, interest in the business gets bigger, more income comes in, popularity that makes it raise its level, which means the businesses next to them have to raise their rent, which causes people to flush out and basically re-gentrify a gentrified area over and over again. So private equity firms could basically benefit from the sale of that space, over and over again. So it's like acquisition versus sale, acquisition versus sale. And so to give that talk, I basically wrapped it in Blippy as an enshittified product. So that's one way of doing covert pedagogy. One of my students handed in a fantastic project at the end. This is Claire Kwong's project, and she wanted to educate people on the trend of the of what does it mean to have nostalgia for the Tuscan kitchen. Okay, now does anybody know what the Tuscan kitchen is, or why we have nostalgia for it? um, the There's been a nostalgia for like early 2000s um, garbage, I guess. So I describe it. I guess millennial high culture is like really causing people to like go like lose their minds at this point, just because like millennials really did get to go like through a heyday of culture, and then like it isn't there. But I think most people just don't realize they're at a peak of culture until it's gone. And most millennials grew up in what we would now refer to as a Tuscan kitchen. I don't remember it being called that, which is funny. But after looking at them, like I could assure you, like that is like for better or for worse. It was only a matter of time before millennials started making these spaces, pining for the spaces from their childhood, which are so ugly. I wouldn't be surprised if they had a hand in killing the kitchen altogether. Um, the did it freeze again? Is my stream frozen? Okay, let me know when we're back. Okay. Yeah, it's I guess the my computer has been restarted at this point, but I'm sure it'll redo that. And Alberti gets probably a boot and then comes back. So basically, there's this nostalgia for basically a food built in a comfort thing in space. Um, so as it says, like up until recently, the early 2000s, kitchen would be an immediate no from any sane potential home buyer. They're not normal times. With the return of the early aughts, nearly every aesthetic category, like I said, is not great. Also, misogyny as an aesthetic category um, becomes wanting again. And so the idea of this quote unquote return to the Tuscan kitchen is really important to consider because nostalgia itself, for those of you who don't know, is fake. Okay, nostalgia is an invention; it's a marketing tactic. Nostalgia is sort of like the word utopia or dystopia. They are imagined realities. Okay, so utopia is an um, imagined perfect universe, and a dystopia is an imagined horrible universe. Okay, so they aren't real. You could imagine moving into them, but those are like equitable futures. The word equitable future is also an imagined future reality. So nostalgia is an imagined version of a past that you did or did not experience. Okay, so in some ways, like you have a nostalgia from these early 2000 things, not because you like the idea of a Tuscan kitchen, but rather you like the idea of the comfort that was enabled in a kitchen like that, whether or not it happened or not. It's just this imagination. It's an imagine. So part of my class, part of tactical media, was explaining time and how very often time is a concept in which we can't really conceptualize very well because we are humans and we move through time in a linear fashion and we can't really experience it the way it really exists, which is pretty simultaneously and all at once. But because we're human beings, this is how we experience things. So it's experience, which means you have to have experience to install the memory of experience in general. So you get what I'm saying. And so one of the things I was trying to explain using the book Deep Time in the Media by Zelensky was to say that like the idea of time is also an expression of the reduction of diversity. And I know that makes sense conceptually, but what I mean by that is as technology and products advance, we reduce the differences that exist because we simplify its experience into the future as we go forward. And so the further back you go, the more diverse and strange things are. And it slowly becomes more concretized as you go into the future. And examples I would give, like going to Lower Manhattan, was like Pearl Street. If you've been to Lower Manhattan, Pearl Street used to be the border. It was the ocean was like right after Pearl Street, you know. So it's like before they rebuilt two more streets. What are the two streets? Water Street, and then there's the street right after that. Those are added on. Okay, those were built after the original part of New York. But what was cool is like Pearl Street was once paved in oyster shells because that's why it was called Pearl Street. And so it's like that's cool and diverse. Now we only have asphalt, which is just a petrol product. Anyway, Claire wanted to explain to the class like how to explain the falsities of nostalgia from the early 2000s. And so she made this amazing product that was called Songs for Morning the Tuscan Kitchen. And it's a CD filled with songs from pre 2008. Okay. And she even has like this great kid who's using this computer right there, which is amazing because you can actually see that's kind of what the computer room looked like in around 2008. You know, pretty, pretty 2008 ish right there. And here's the song list. Okay. And so the tracks are um, Who Says You Can't Go Home by Bon Jovi, Come Away With Me, Nora Jones, You and I, Ingrid Michaelson, SOS by the Jonas Brothers, Sex on Fire by Kings of Leon, Burned to the Ground by Nickelback, and so on. And these are all the tracks from basically a time in which everything was comfortable and nothing hurt, which is obviously bullshit. Okay. This is still post 9/11 and it's the aughts. Okay. Which we now have returned to calling the noughties. Okay. So it wasn't a good time. It's just that nostalgia makes it seem like that. And so Claire put together this amazing zine that comes with it that explains. And I'm going to just say one of the most amazing parts of this is that the Tuscan kitchen anticipates the financial crisis. That's what really it is. When we get nostalgic for something pre 2008, you're nostalgic for a time in which you didn't have to consistently think about finances. The 2008 financial crisis literally caused people to think of it. Money all the time. Even people who are not money privileged. And when I say privilege, it means you don't think of it. Money privilege is like just have so much wealth that money just isn't a thought for you, or it becomes too much of a thought that it's all that you think about, like Elon, who is psychotic now. But in the case of 2008, like until we had that financial crisis, it wasn't really, we weren't able to conceptualize what it looked like to have a loss of money like that. And so the Tuscan kitchen represents a time before that thought process. And so Claire put this together as a way of saying, if you were sitting down in the Tuscan kitchen at that point, here, let's I'm just gonna read it from Claire's work here. Who's actually yearning for the Tuscan kitchen? It's ugly as fuck. We don't actually want to paint our kitchens and oxidize red and drape soft touch plastic grapes all over the edges of crown molding that doesn't touch the ceiling. We miss what the Tuscan kitchen represented: upward mobility. It was a visual signifier of the middle and upper class wealth. The Tuscan kitchen felt like a promise that the good life was attainable. Then, excuse me, oh my gosh, I didn't mean to sneeze in the middle of that. Sorry, one more. Then 2008 happened. Banks gave mortgages to people they shouldn't have. The housing market collapsed, and the government had to bail out everyone out and to prevent total economic collapse. Good stuff. While the market technically recovered, it signaled the end of our economic romanticism of Panera Bread, the Cheesecake Factory, and home ownership. And so this is a good way of explaining that through the idea of the music at the time, because if you could think about that, you could understand that. And here's a line directly from her piece here, which is, by the time that, oh, here it is. The U.S. had been at war with Iraq for 5 years, and a U.S.-Iraqi agreement declared it would last another 3. The polar bear was added to the endangered species list. Barack Obama was the light at the end of the tunnel, but 2016 was already laughing at us. And that is a great sentence, because that's how time actually works, is that it all has happened already. So when you think about time in terms of yearning for a nostalgia, you are yearning for something that you already know its outcome. So no matter what nostalgia places you into that past experience, whether you want to sit in your Tuscan kitchen and share stories or like have soda or whatever, you are already being laughed at by a future in which you already exist in. That the choice to have embodied that nostalgia is only a way of escaping a reality that you can change and make more beautiful today. And that's really, really important, is that you have those actions that you could do now. You live on a beautiful planet. Like, you're already there. You don't have to do that. You don't have to go to that place. You could already just do that. What did they say that they made that if you go and like find a place where you could like have a beer on a beach, there's a beautiful planet where that exists, and it's here. So it's like, that's the only one we know of. In fact, as far as we know, side note, this is the only planet in the known universe that has trees. It's so rare. The idea of a tree is so rare. So it's like, that's here already. Okay. So of course that brings me to the other points, which is like, where does this go with this? So anyway, tactical media turned out really, really great. Brand safety was about trust and safety. And I think I'm going to do a whole other kind of talk about that, because talking about trust and safety in the age of X is actually like really difficult. Like, it really does come down to like, how do you feel safe on the internet? What are the borderlands of harm? When do you know a platform is no longer for you? And it's when you start asking those questions, when you know that like there's some sites that are like really fairly restrictive, there's some sites that are community policed, and there are other sites that are basically like Nazi havens, like X. Like, when you get those sign of senses, it's like, how do you talk about the idea of safety now? And so we wrapped it around the idea of like, if you want to talk about safety, you have to talk about it in terms of advertising, because advertisers and brands want to feel safe. So a lot of your safety on the internet is really about if you're in the right place where brands feel safe. So the more brands feel safe, the more likely you can feel safe. So we did wrap it around with that. And then my SponCon course was one of my favorites. It's, as I said earlier, it's a TV studies course. So I really went through the history of television. I'm talking about the technology. Like, what is a CRT, a cathode ray tube? What is the idea of turning light into electricity and electricity into light? What is the ideas of television as a medium? And what did it do? Because it combined telegraphy and telephony simultaneously. So it's the radio and communication mixed into one with pictures using the same technologies until 2009. And then TV ceased to exist. They turned it off. But the technology persists. Television is still a product. Television is a genre. It is a medium, but it is not a technology any longer. You can no longer buy VHS. You can no longer buy a VCR. You can no longer buy a CRT. For those of you who still have a CRT, hold onto it. Video game units some of them can't play accurately on LED TVs. You want to play on a CRT. So don't lose your CRTs if you have the space to keep it. It's really kind of important if you're going to like do retro work. So our conversation basically started around like Texaco Star Theater, sponsored television, all the way up through commercial advertising, cinematic commercials. Showed Ridley Scott's entry into the foray, showed the Coca-Cola Hilltop video, 1984, of course, another Ridley Scott, and then went to the high times, the 1980s and 90s, MTV, made our way to the 2000s, and then the end of television, and then influencers, of course. And it really was actually a really fun course. Unfortunately, the students really depressed. It was a really heavy course. And that was because I think while the course was going on this semester, we got to watch in real time as like Barry Weiss destroyed CBS News. And when you look at the history of television, television is a medium that matured very quickly. In 1948, it was in 1 in 4 households. And by 1958, it was like in every household. But in 1954, Edward R. Murrow used the television to basically engage with politics directly and to show how to respond to political attacks that are affecting people everywhere. And that the television media matures like instantly, whereas radio took like 25-ish years to mature. Like obviously this is how technology goes. Like if you look at like the internet, you could arguably say like the Arab Spring matured a lot of the internet really quickly. So it was really like maybe if you look at it from the social media perspective, maybe 6, maybe 5 years. So it's all in that same similar timeline, but TV really became like this stronghold, this household experience. But TV shapes everything around us. You can't think outside of television. Even here, I'm thinking in television. I'm thinking about the framing that television would be appreciating. The eye on the 3/4 line, because the lower third would be here, the eyes would be here. I'm looking at the vectors and the shape so I can see where the eye lines would all go. If you're looking at everything in this room, which arm am I dealing with? This arm. When you look at this arm, you'll see the lines, all the lines point at my eyes. That's TV. All right. I'm doing television, even though I'm on a stream. Technically, I don't need to abide by television if I'm using YouTube. It is not television. I could be upside down. I could be in the corner. I could be talking to you from like here. But the fact that I keep reproducing it is because we are so aesthetically attached to television that this is what it must look like. And that's why the vertical video works so well for influencers, because it chops out all of the superfluous waste, all the stuff that's being unused by the screen itself. And that's why the dance challenge always looks better on vertical video, because it's just the body you're focusing on. And that's why that's the most mimetic product of vertical video, is usually dance or challenges, is because it fills the screen. It doesn't require all the framing necessary to do this. Side note, I'm going to gut this entire room and rebuild it. Okay. It's an energy thing. After a few semesters, I just feel like this isn't working anymore. So come September, this will all look different. I don't know how yet. All right. I'm just going to figure it out. But anyway, so that was a really good course. And of course, it ends with a discussion of like, where do we go from here? What does SponCon look like? And I wrote about this in my newsletter recently, but I talked about the show Designed to Last on Hulu. Pure SponCon, literally made by the American Family Insurance Company, made by the insurance company. So it looks like TV. It's reality television. It acts like reality television. It is reality television, but it is not television at all. Because again, television is dead. Second, it's not television because it's literally made as a commercial. That is a commercial, not television. But its shape and experience is the idea of television, the aesthetic of television. But the most important part of that entire lecture, and the most important part of all that I explained, was the show is really a bit of covert pedagogy that is really hard to explain. And the covert pedagogy was, the show is really about climate change. It's about disaster prep. That's really what it was about. And of course, that led to conversations about climate change, which, as after I began this entire stream by explaining that like this was the first semester I've had since the quarantine era, of being like students not being as traumatized, I of course ended my semester by traumatizing the shit out of them. So my bad. We talked about climate change, and several were visibly upset, like visibly upset, and I felt a little bad about it. But I do also feel like I must. I talked about this on last week's stream. I must tell them the truth, and that brings me to this point that I've been thinking about lately a lot, which is all this pushback against data centers. There's a lot, and I think it's deserved, very deserved. So to be clear, if you're watching this and all of a sudden you're just like, oh, this is a debate about data centers. No, I'm sorry, I don't. This isn't a thing I like. I don't like data centers. I don't think they're a good idea. I don't like what they do. When I was taught at Malloy, I used to talk about the cloud a lot. The cloud is a marketing term for a data center or a server farm. I'm going to use the difference here: server farm versus data center. Okay, they're similar but different. A server farm is typically not the same thing as a data center, because server farms sometimes are more of a storage unit than a data center, which is more of a production unit. Okay, there's a little bit of a difference there. They're pretty much the same technologies. One causes much more heat to exhaust out of it. That's a data center, because it's creating, it's generating. Whereas a server farm is much more of like the redundancy of your technologies. So like Facebook requires massive amounts of storage, massive. And so they basically have the cloud to store their devices. And the cloud is holes, like archaeological holes. They're only about 2 stories deep ish, but there's still a hole, not a cloud. Okay. There's a space in the earth. And then there's basically what you could visibly see is usually a huge warehouse sized building. And then underneath it is typically like where hard drives are. They're hard drives, servers. And there's cool zones and hot zones. Basically, it's storage, and it's redundant. So wherever there's a data center or a server farm, there's another one somewhere with the same data, because if one were to fail, it has to have a redundancy so nothing's lost. Okay, and then it heals. It goes back to the old question of hard drives in general, which is that there's no such thing as a hard drive that doesn't fail. It's not an if, it's a when. And so you always should understand that you should create redundancies regardless. And so your data, if you're storing in the cloud, is redundant. They have it stored elsewhere. Otherwise, they wouldn't have security over it. The new debate that's coming around this is the data centers, which are basically the same thing as a server farm, less likely to be a hole in the ground, because it needs the space, the land space, to spread itself out, because most of it is exhaust. It's basically it's emitting a lot of exhaust. It needs a lot of space to disperse its heat. And that's because it's processing. So it's not just using the servers and the hard drives in that case, it's actually using GPUs. This is why any product that requires a GPU, from a computer to a video game unit, is expensive as shit. And that's because your generative AI systems, your willingness to be a slopper, is making your video games more expensive. Okay. They're the same technology. It generates. Do you think that when you're using GTA, that the whole thing is visible simultaneously? No, it's only visible of what you're looking at. When you turn your head, it generates that part of the game. It isn't about fog of war. It's about like, it can only do so much at the same time. So every time you're moving around, your computer heats up because it's generating that space around you. Think about that at scale. Think about every human generating something out of the ether, the sloposphere. It's like it's basically burning the heat to just make those things appear. And the problem here is because people want to expand AI technologies, even though their use cases have basically plateaued, if not started to diminish. As anyone who's seen like the AI, the destiny I talked about on network issues, about people being AI boosters, being dark money, using dark money for it, the speakers at several commencement speeches being pro AI and being booed. Gen Z dislikes AI so much that a lot of it is plateaued. At this point, it's basically its use case is wearing out. But that doesn't mean people don't want the data centers. And my conspiracy theory here is this: it doesn't matter if Gen AI lasts or doesn't last. What matters is the data centers exist. Because if the data centers exist, they could always be repurposed into something else. And I've talked about this multiple times, but it will be repurposed into surveillance. I'm sorry, but that's what it will be repurposed into. Not only the capture, but the retrieval. Okay. The ability for people to do search at scale instantaneously on any citizen simultaneously requires a ton of processing power. And these data centers aren't useless without Gen AI. They are just useful in a different way. going to give you a few stats, okay? A few things about data centers. One, and I'm not going to do share screen on this because every time I do share screen, the stream decides to poop because I'm on a laptop called a MacBook Air. Its processing power isn't that great. I should be using an OBS or a third-party streaming device. I have them. I just don't feel like setting them up. I'm off for the next 2 weeks. Maybe I'll figure out how to put up an actual camera, like and make this a real stream and run an OBS system instead of running the stream off of YouTube. And then I could cross post to LinkedIn. You could do a live stream to both. You could do like restreams. So here's an article from March 30th, 2026 called Scientists Have Found Alarming Environmental Impact of Vast Data Centers. Alarming. And this article is about heat islands. Okay. Basically, the data centers are so hot that the area around the data center is a heat island. A data center can warm the land around them up to 16 degrees Fahrenheit, making life hotter for more than 340 million people. What's that number? That number is the same amount of people in the United States. Okay. So this is a global number, but that's like basically the United States is hot. Think of it that way. What if all the data centers were here? So they basically blast heat coming out of it. Now, what do you hear? You want to hear what a data center sounds like? I don't even need to play the screen. I can actually just play the sound for you. So here's what it sounds like. This is somebody who is looking at a data center right near their house. Let me put the volume good. Okay. You hear that? But it sounds like a jet engine that is basically just on all the time. So it has sound pollution. So it's heat, sound pollution. Here's some more stats for you. Data drain and water. Typically it drinks as much water. I'm trying to find the exact data here. How much water does it drink? Data centers. I have all these things. It drinks almost enough water. Let me see. I'm just going to Google it. It does 300. Alrighty, here's some crazy numbers. 300,000 to 500,000 gallons per day of fresh water is consumed by a data center. That's a medium-sized data center. Takes about 300,000 to 500,000 gallons a day. Okay, how many gallons are in an Olympic-sized swimming pool? 660,000 gallons are in a Olympic-sized swimming pool, okay? So think of it this way, that that's crazy. Yeah, so basically a medium-sized data center almost uses the entirety of water in an Olympic-sized swimming pool every single day. A large size uses about 1 million gallons. So let's imagine that. Let's just talk from the perspective that it's using a Olympic-sized swimming pool every day. Every single day, a data center will drink an Olympic-sized swimming pool to make your slop. Okay, that's what it's doing. So that's the amount of water. Now it has to consume fresh water because salt water is salinated. It'll burn the machine up. Okay, you can't use salt water in any machine. It has to always be desalinated. It has to be clean, which means where are they getting clean water from? Do they have a water treatment plant? What if it is a landlocked region? It means they're using the drinking water that people are getting from the ground. So that's what data centers are consuming. And so when they're consuming that, it means that you're not consuming that, okay? The last part of this, of course, is how much electricity does a data center use? There's a cool chart here. I'm going to drop it in here so you can see it. If you want to click on this is up to you so you can see what I'm looking at. This is how much electricity data centers use in 2026. And so total active data centers, 4,500 across 50 states. Consumption, 176 terawatt hours, which is about 4.4% of all the electricity is to a data center. There's about 700 new facilities under construction. State with most data centers, Virginia, 665. Largest projects, Stargate, which runs OpenAI, Oracle, SoftBank. It's in Abilene, Texas. Now here's your example, okay? Terawatt hours. That makes little sense to me or you. One single terawatt hour, okay, one, powers about 90,000 houses. Okay, how do you picture 90,000 houses? That's well, I don't know. Is that a town? Is that a big? So think of it this way. I like to use Long Island as an example. Two counties, Nassau, Suffolk. Okay, I know Queens and Brooklyn, or however you're looking at this map in your head. Queens and Brooklyn are technically on Long Island. I don't want to talk about that. From the line at Queens, Nassau, and Suffolk, two counties have about 1.1 million homes. Okay, which means consumed 90,000 into that would be 11 terawatt hours. Okay, so basically a year, so 11 terawatt hours per year powers Long Island. Okay, that's how much. Okay, 11. Okay, 11 terawatt hours for Long Island. Okay, let's just keep that math, that little mental math in there, and go back to our chart. And you could go down and see that Virginia is currently using 24 terawatt hours a year. So it's consuming two Long Islands, two Long Islands per year in power to power Virginia's data centers. Okay, two Long Islands per year. Okay, all the houses on Long Island per year to power the data centers in Virginia. Okay, so it's just it's hard for us to conceptualize how much power, how much the data centers are actually being used, or what they do, or what all this is like good for, or anything like that. So you really do have to reconceptualize it. I like to use Long Island as an example because it is a contained area. You literally can't spread any further. It is the ocean. There's a bay on one side and an ocean on the other. Well, technically, bays on both sides, and then the ocean. But I used to live there, so I loved the concept of Long Island. I used to work there. I technically, since I'm on Queens, I still technically work on that island, um, and it's just good to think about. I like to think about. There's a part of Long Island on the South Shore that I used to bring up all the time. Um, I want to just make sure I'm saying the name of the town right. Near Lynbrook, but I just want to make sure I'm saying it right. It's on the South Shore, and it is Island Park. Okay, I love Island Park. Island Park is this very interesting little town with about 10,000 people. Okay, 10,000 citizens live there. It is above Long Beach, and it is below Oceanside. Okay, so it's a tiny little town, 3 feet, 1 meter above sea level for an entire town on Long Island, 10,000 people. Under the current conditions that are now unfortunately unchangeable, thanks in part to data centers and electricity use, we are now moving towards ocean sea level rise of 1 to 2 meters in the next century. Regardless, nothing can stop that at this point. We can mitigate its future growth any more than that. At this point, we still have time. We still do. I don't want to lose hope on that. But at this point, you are looking at, no matter what, Island Park will be submerged within the next century. Okay, it'll just be, the streets will be filled with water. That means 10,000 climate refugees off of the island. Okay, where do 10,000 climate refugees go? And I'm not even including Long Beach or any of the South Shore towns that are in similar situations, maybe like Babylon or whatever. Like, I'm not even talking about those. Where do you put those people? Where do you put climate refugees from Long Island? And these are questions we are not asking. And a lot of these discussions about, should we have a data center? Should we have any of these things? Should we have this? We're not thinking about the fact that this is contributing to a massive issue, not just in electricity and water and the water wars that could potentially come from this. Other countries have already had water wars. We're looking at an expansive dehumanization process of the United States and the world based on data. It is a anti-human endeavor to basically have an expression of faux creativity. And that is, again, is why, to bring this all back, why I'm so glad to be teaching projects and creativity and tactility in media, and what it means to shoot analog and like create media that is like archaeological, something you could retrieve later, something that isn't just numbers and ether and exhaust. Because when I hear data, when I hear Gen AI, or I hear somebody generating something that they could have easily have done themselves, I think about exhaust. I think about waste. I think about the loss of water, things that we'll never get back. And those types of things really do bother me. It bothers me deeply inside. Like, it's tough as somebody who taught environmental humanities for 5.5 years. and somebody who like grew up as an environmentalist, like it's tough to see data centers become like something people are cheering for, and then other people are like thankfully being like, no, get them out of here. But this Kevin O'Leary a-hole, I think I brought this up last week, but like, and it's in my newsletter. Somebody made a joke like we should just replace Central Park with a data center, and somebody made a very realistic joke and said if you replaced New York Central Park with a data center, it's only 5% as big as the Kevin O'Leary data center he wants to build in Utah, which would use 50% of the water in the entire state. It would be seen from space. For what? For what? I mean, obviously we know for what, Gen AI and later surveillance, but to accelerate global climate change. That's what it's for. That's if you want to know what data centers are for, that's what they're for. So I think there isn't it's hard for me to argue for data centers, and I know that this like always comes off as like people wondering how we have better conversations about it. And I think the best conversation about it is make it more realistic. Make it so people understand what you're saying by relating it to something that they know. Use a region around you. Find statistics on a region near you. Find out how many houses are in that town. Find out how many terawatt hours are using that power. Give somebody a concrete example of what the equivalencies are with your statistics in order to explain to them better why data centers, where we should be done with them at this point. Okay, no more. Okay, it's kind of getting crazy. But in order to explain it, you really do need a lot more information, especially information that people could recognize directly, like the Tuscan kitchen. If you want to understand nostalgia, you should look at crap kitchens from the early 2000s, because if you make that make sense to somebody, you could explain the financial crisis and the idea that aspirational, normal upward mobility that once existed in the early 2000s was literally an imaginary, because we live in a present where we now know its outcome. Time is already happened. It has already done the thing, which means when you build a data center today, you have already created climate refugees tomorrow. It has already happened. They're both simultaneous. It's just that we're going to have to experience in real time unless we decide that future is not the one we want. We want a better one. We want a more equitable future. And we have to do that together. Okay. So that's where it comes down to. So it was a great semester to go over that. Now I'm in grading hell. Another week of grading. Next Thursday, there is no stream. I am doing graduation. I'm the usher. I like doing that position. It just means I tell the row to stand up, come up here, hand in your little index cards. I just love that. I think that's so great. You're like kind of the last person they see before going across the stage. And then the following week, I will be in Rome doing a talk on my methodology of critical internet literacies as it relates to media literacy. So that's what I'll be doing in Rome that following Thursday. And then, so I have 3 talks. One is talking to my old class I used to teach, critical internet literacies, and then media literacies of absence. And so in 3 weeks, I'll come back and I'll explain media literacies of absence, because by that point, I'll know what I talked about. And I'll tell you a story about how we can understand what's not in a data set, the things inside of data centers that aren't there when you're using generative AI technologies. You could make whatever you want, but you're still using incomplete data. And so I'm going to try to explain to people how to use that, how to make that knowledge concrete. Anyway, thank you for watching. Thank you for being here, as always. And I really do hope you have a great week and a great weekend. And you can always find more of what I do in network issues on this channel. So subscribe where the button is. Check out the network issues playlist. Also check out network issues on Instagram. It's with me and Destiny Day, and we talk about basically the intersection of marketing and the internet. Check out my Substack, newmediahomework.substack.com. At some point, I'm going to get off Substack. It's a lot of work, and I just don't have the time yet. Also, you can follow me on Instagram. It's just Jamie Cohen. And I hope you all are doing great, and I hope everything goes well for you. So till then, be curious, be vigilant, and persist. Thanks so much for being here.